I will give you some data that we have done empirical research on the mobility on the UF campus where we are. And I can only give you some hints where I think we can use this data and other data that is known for filling this theoretical concept and show the advantages. So this is what we're going to do. The last, and of course I'm very keen on having your opinion on the concept, whether you find it convincing, where you see it not convincing, so please be open with critics. And at the same time, we had a blurring of boundaries. In the 19th century, that meant that the rural people who were, and also in Europe, bound to very short space where they had to live. As farmers, they were dependent on the nobleman. It was not slavery anymore, but they were dependent on the nobleman. They could not move away. Yeah. And this blurred with the Industrial Revolution, and that was the biggest first mass mobility in Europe, that masses of rural people, poor rural people, went into the cities to work in the factories. And how did they go there? By the steam railway. So we see this connection too. And then a bit later on, in the second part of the 19th century, big cities in Europe, inclusively Berlin, blurred the boundaries, the cities became bigger and bigger. Let's take just a number. In 1850, Berlin had about 600,000 inhabitants. And the surface of Berlin was even smaller than the inner ring of Berlin, what we concern today as the Berlin city center. Just 80 years later, Berlin had about 4 million inhabitants, and the surface was more than double the size. So this is what I mean with blurring the boundaries. And what was the effect? Yeah, of course, people had to go much longer ways for work, whereas in, let's say, in cities in the Middle Ages, you just would step out, go 20 meters or 50 meters to do your shopping, to go to the market, to go to work. That was all on a very small space. And already by the end of the 19th century, people had to go long distances, kilometers. Some had to spend 1 or 2 hours to go to work. Until today, as we know, especially in such megacities like Sao Paulo or Delhi, Tokyo, you name it. So there we see also a connection of mobility to social changes. So the society is transforming and mobility is transforming. And what we see by the end of the 20th century was called shrinkage of space or time-space compression. What is that? These are concepts, especially by European geologists, geographers, that were dealing with new phenomena like high-speed trains or low-cost airlines that provoked a multi-local lifestyle and a disappearance of spatial fixation. For example, the phenomena that people fly into Berlin from Barcelona or London or Paris for just spending a weekend at the Berghain. People do that. I mean, we all know about it, and there are quite some people doing that. This is a very, very new phenomenon. Let's say we have it for 10, 15, maybe 20 years, but by the end of the 20th century, it was not possible. When I was going for my first time myself to Barcelona, I took the train. It took me 1.5 hours, 1.5 days to get there, and it was a very big adventure. It cost a lot of money. It was a big thing. Yeah, this has changed today. Yeah, people spend a weekend. Oh, let's go to Paris. Yeah. So, and this is what Harvey especially reminds me by time-space compression. Those journeys that took 2 days just 50 years ago or 60 years ago, today you make in 2 hours. And this process already started in the 19th century. There's a famous statement of famous German author Heinrich Heine about the introduction of the railway. That was also already a revolution. Whereas before Goethe, the most well-known German author, had to go to Italy with horse riding and such stuff. So it took him weeks, months to get to Italy. Yeah, and now we just take at that time in the 19th century, you could go there by a railway. Then it took 1 day instead of, let's say, 1 month, and now it takes 1 hour to fly from Berlin to Rome. So this is what meant with time-space compression. And this, of course, has a lot of has an effect on people's lifestyle. As we know, you need some money to do it, but many people have this multi-local lifestyle, which is causing some problems. On the other hand, we have also constraints. People who don't have so much money are still constrained to a certain area. They can move as freely as other people. And there are also demands. That means, especially in work, if you want to make career, you can't sit in your small town where you have grown up. You have to go to the at least middle-sized university city to get an exam. And if you want to make real career, let's say in a big business, in Germany you have to go to Frankfurt, you have to be mobile. And you have either you change the space of living, or like many people do in Berlin also, as you know, Berlin has got some economic problems. Frankfurt is the city of business. There are some people who spend the weekends in Berlin as they live there, they like the lifestyle, but on Monday morning they take the DB Sprinter from Südkreuz and go to Frankfurt, spend there 3 or 4 days, then they come home, 1 day home office is permitted. These are these new forms of lifestyle we as mobility planners have to think of. Their reality. So, to summarize, there is a linkage of physical, horizontal mobility, the moving in space, and what sociologists call vertical mobility or social mobility, making career, going up, getting more money, being higher ranked in society. This is also changing somehow. In let's say 20 years ago, it was very prominent to say the more you go away, the more you're moving, the bigger your mobility, the more you will have the chance to go upwards in society, to move vertically. This is an assumption which is at least in doubt nowadays, and we'll come to the point later on why it is. But this is a general assumption. So to make career, you have to go long distances. This connection, as I said, might be challenged by two processes at the moment. On the one hand, there is the saying of the deglobalized world, which is also, it's not a fixed term. I mean, it's heavily contested whether we really live in a deglobalized world, but as we all know, because of the actual situation, there are some signs that we might have a stronger regional economic development, regional, that says in world regions, Europe, Eastern Asia, North America, South America. This is of course still connected to mobility, but not in the sense that like 20 years ago it was say, yeah, we like prominent Spanish sociologist Manuel Castells said, we're living in a network society, the elite is traveling from London to New York to Tokyo to do the businesses. This might change at the moment, and it's also, of course, because we are living in a digital world. We all perceive the possibilities of the digitalization of digital communication within the COVID crisis, where we realize, we don't have to go to certain spaces to meet our teams every day or every week. We can do it via Zoom or Teams or whatever. And of course, this digital revolution we are living in now is changing mobility and is changing work relations very harshly. So, we all know that the dominance of special forms of physical mobility, especially the mobility with cars, has got social, political, economic reasons. Yeah, it was the car was introduced by 1900, really in Europe, by Mr. Daimler, and in Europe it took some time to pave the way for the car to be the most dominant means of transport. Paving the way was already the right notion for it, because it took many approaches by the state, many help to make the car the most successful means of transport in the 20th century. It was not a process that came naturally. There were interests behind, and also by the state, to use this new technology also, for example, for military reasons. So in Germany, it is proven that the big breakthrough for the car mobility has been done in the years from 1933 to 1945 by the Nazi Party. They were using, they saw the ability of using automobility for military reasons, and that's why they have built the Autobahn. There's one very simple example for it. Also, this assumption is contested somehow, but there are some hints that we can see that the Autobahn was not built to help the private car owners, because at that time, practically, there was no private car users in Germany. It was very, 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 very low. So the Autobahn was built to make the troops easily move from the west of Germany to the east, and from the east to the west. And later on, after the war, there was a different story. Volkswagen, yeah, it is the firm was built by the Nazis to foster the military production. That was the first reason for the Volkswagen. Yeah. And the little Volkswagen that existed, the Beetle that existed already, was not in mass production, was never in mass production during the Nazi time. So what I only want to show with this example is that there is a strong connection of state politics and the economy to push forward some sort of mobility. For example, I guess you know that in 1920 there were already many electric cars moving out in Berlin, developed by Siemens and other companies. And it was when they were functioning very well, as today. And it was a decision that was made by the petrol industry. Oh, we have to push forward this interest in our products, in gasoline, we want to say gasoline, so we have to get away with electric cars from it. So for more than 100 years, nobody was thinking of having an electric car, but they existed already in 1920. So this is a very important thing we have to keep in mind. There is a connection between politics, economy, and mobility. And this is a typical phase for I just will end up and then we will, yeah? So, yeah, finally, why we should look on, as sociologists look on transport, is that we all know that climate change is urging to CO2 reduction in transport. Yeah, we all know about that. And one very important sector to reduce CO2 is the gasoline-based automobility sector within that. This has to be replaced by non-emissive means of transport, and of course this will only be possible by broad social acceptance. If you don't have social acceptance, then it won't work. How create it? These are questions for sociology. So that is about why sociology on mobility, and yeah, now I'm open for questions.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you would agree with the statement that, because before we said that in the 19th and 20th century, society was transforming, and then based on the transformation of society, mobility transformed. I have the feeling that nowadays it's totally the opposite, that politicians or companies are trying to change mobility and then forcing the society to transform. Would you agree with that, or?
Well, I would always say, also in history, it was an interplay. You can't say which was first. Was like in German we say der Has und der Igel, who was first. In history, the steam power was, on the one hand, very important for the industry. It was first used for producing of textiles, but then when it was realized you can move a big iron horse with it, so the locomotive, then the industry for producing these engines was very important. It grew very harshly. So here in Berlin, Borsig and other firms, more than in 1850, more than 50,000 people worked in the sector producing engines for it. That caused that people were moving into town with the steam power. So there is an interligation.
But do you think that came afterwards? Because I thought that due to industrialization and of course also the steam engine, then urbanization was triggered somehow, and then of course because it was easier to get the people from the villages to the cities with the rails, with the help of the steam engine, then that came afterwards, after the people already saw the opportunities in the cities.
Well, in fact, it was not that it was not a voluntary movement into the cities. People had to, because there also the agricultural industry industrialized, and there was no place more for the work. But I find it hard to say that that was the first point. That was the innovation of the steam engine. That was first used, as far as I know, in the textile industry. Yeah, that meant dismission of many workers in the textile industry. And then someone, I think Mr. Stevenson, developed the steam engine. And I would say that was an intercourse. It was, you can't say this was first and then this was followed. I think it's very hard. You will always find someone to argue against. And if you look for today now, digitalization is going on since 40 years, with the start, let's say, in 30 years. Let's take Windows 95 as the big breakthrough for the masses of digitalization. The internet started by the end of the 90s. It was very clear by the end of the 90s that the internet would change our lives. And at that time, no one thought about it would change also our mobility. Yeah? This is recently a new development caused by firms like Bolt, Uber, Tesla, or whatever. So you have the point where innovations get into the market and are used or are failing. There are also many failures in.
But that's what I meant. That I feel like that supply is set somehow, and then by companies, by politicians, and then society either accepts it or rejects it. And that's how innovations keep developing. And then, of course, it's also an interplay that companies adjust it to whether demand is bigger and demand is lower. And I feel like it, of course, it's not black and white. But this trend is more coming from the companies or politicians or organizations offering solutions, mobility-wise, and then seeing what the society does with it.
Yeah, I mean, these are the questions that we are researching in the Mobility to Grid campus. Especially, I am bothered with the acceptance side. So, I think we won't clear it up now or today, but this is exactly the question why sociologists should look on it. You name politicians and innovators from the industry in the same point. I mean, the problem is there are also different paces. I think it's not really that the politicians say, oh, we have to develop electromobility and use it. As you see how it is working in Germany, the politics are more on the brake of electromobility, and I think the usage by the population is more a thing of, is it practical for me? Is it economically viable? These questions are important. And then when the conditions are made, and this is what I meant with the interplay of politics and economy. If there was a political will, like it was in the 1930s, building the autobahns, if you have an infrastructure that is fostered by the state for a certain technology, may it be the regular car, may it be the steam locomotive, yeah, which was also first in Europe by private innovations. All the first railways were private, but by the end of the 19th century, they're going into property of the states. At that time, there was, of the states, with also a military component in it. It was also important for the states to have the railways for their military purpose. This might also be the case for something like, at least for, we see it in the internet. The internet was also a military development. It is in the 1980s, it was a development by the militaries. Yeah. So, there is, I would say, to keep it open, there is an interplay between politics, economy, and the acceptance, the broad acceptance in society is a thing that I would say people are very practical. If it helps you in your daily life, if you can afford it, then you use it. If it's too expensive, when you have some uncertainties, like it is still today with electromobility, you're going abroad, you don't know whether there are stations to use it, then you rather don't do it. If the conditions are made for it, people will use it. But these definitely are questions for the sociology in there. I'm afraid we have to go on a little bit, otherwise we won't make it. And I promise to try to make it a bit shorter now and faster. So we move on now to Pierre Bourdieu. Very shortly, he was a French sociologist coming from ethnography. He first worked also as military servant as French military servant in Algeria, that at that time was still part of France. He developed his methodology researching a tribe in Algeria, and that is just for that he already died by the end of the 1990s, and we can say he is one of the big innovators in sociological theory. So why? You have to think that at that time, the 1960s, 70s, everywhere, all over the world, especially in Europe, especially in France, Marxist theory was very prominent. And the core of Marxist theory is that all social developments are based in economics, more or less like that, to make it very, very, very simple. And the big innovation of Bourdieu was that he said, yes, economy is very important. It is a very important social field, as he called it. And it's interfering in politics, in arts, in science, but there's also a certain logic inside these social fields. So this is even something that system theorists like Newman would say, but they are more rigid. They would say politics function in their own way. There's a certain logic of politics that has nothing to do with the logics of economy. And in arts, there is a certain logic that is not affected by economy. I would say I find this approach more convincing because, as we know, economy is interfering definitely in politics. We just had it about the mobility. It's also about the arts, yeah. It's not about artistic dominance that is arts are developing, but it is also by economic trends that are interfering into the arts. It's the same in science. Yeah. So I think this model is quite convincing to me. Yeah, it is one of the many models we have in sociology. But probably the most important innovation of Bourdieu at that time was that he developed different types of capital. You know, normally capital is used as economic capital. Yeah, everyone knows that. But Bourdieu developed this system. There are two other types of capital. There's social capital and cultural capital. What is that? Social capital is all connections that you have earned or inherited to other humans that you can stress for certain moments. For example, if you're born a nobleman, yeah, then you will have your connections inside certain spheres of society. If you're in a workers' council, yeah, then you have your social capital by knowing all these other people working in the workers' council you're dealing with. If you have your own interest, you can use this capital, you can invest it to get more out of it. Let's say to get more money from your boss. This is the social capital. What is the cultural capital? well, to make this simple, all these three means together form what Bourdieu is calling the symbolic capital. Interesting is now this cultural capital. Here it's even more differentiated. He is talking about incorporated cultural capital. This is, for example, the way you move, the way you speak, the way you eat. And to give an example again with the nobleman, if you're growing up in a noble family, you have a certain form of acting, of behaving, and you can assume that other people of your class will recognize you by the way you speak, by the way you walk, by the way you go. So I will give you examples of it later on. This is why, for example, most of the German diplomats up till today are deriving from noble families. I don't know the exact percentage, but it was in the 1960s to 70s more than 60% of German diplomats, high-rank diplomats, were von Hesen, von. Yeah, this the von signifies the noble family. And if you look to them, they have all this they have this posture. They come in and you know, oh, important people. This is what Bourdieu is calling the habitus. This is very important for the incorporated cultural capital. There is also objectified cultural capital. That is, for example, books, a library. If you own a library, this is something you can exchange for economic capital, but which is also creating sort of acceptance within your class. If you're an intellectual, you should have a broad stand of books behind you. Yeah, if your boss is visiting you or you're going online, you see it very often by professors doing online courses. They always have many books behind them. So this is what meant by objectified cultural capital. And then you have the institutionalized cultural capital, which are the certificates that you earn by school, for example, or, of course, diploma at university. If you want to make a career in the sciences, you can't go without this institutionalized cultural capital. You have to have a doctorate, otherwise you won't make career in sciences. Yeah? And this is I think a very important innovation that Bourdieu put into sociology, to a side of economic capital that he still thinks is the most important form of capital, but there are other forms of capital that are important for the judgment of the social being and the social stratification. Here you see the social field and the dominant types of capital. So in politics is most important is the social capital. In economy, of course, economic capital. In arts, it is more important that you behave like an artist, not that you produce something. But taking Andy Warhol, everyone can be an artist for 15 minutes. You have to behave like an artist to be accepted like an artist. So this is important. And in science, I just mentioned it, institutionalized cultural capital. So, and I already mentioned the third category, very important, the habitus, which is built by these, especially these three means of cultural capital. The habitus is something that you hear, that you see, that is represented, for example, by many books behind you, or Also, if we take it in mobility, if you are going, if your car is an old timer, you show that you have esteemed taste. That is a very important thing. The taste shows your distinction, and this is Bourdieu's most important book, is on social distinctions. How people distinguish themselves from others, or let's say from other classes. So, and there we come to the social space. So this is very interesting for us as mobility researchers. The social space interconnects the physical space and what was seen here in this scheme of the capital. So this is something that Bourdieu developed, that my colleague Oliver Dimbert has put into this scheme. So we see here above the general volume of capital and a very low volume of capital. And then he tried to put in certain professions into classes. He called it a class system. I think we could agree that unskilled workers neither have economic capital nor cultural capital, so they're very low, and that people, entrepreneurs, industrialists, have either very high economic capital, maybe a little less cultural capital. This is a model. Yeah, we don't have adapted. It's important to say this is something that Bourdieu derived in the 1960s for France. So it is locally and timely very constrained. Yeah, for example, I would doubt that university professors really have very low economic capital, as Bourdieu puts it here. Full university professors, at least in Germany nowadays, or in the United States, earn quite sufficient. I would ranking in different size. But we might agree that teachers, artists, intellectuals that he had in mind at that time might be very low in economic capital, but quite high in cultural capital. Of course, we will find some artists who are selling each painting for $2 million. So it doesn't fit in there. But this is a model, just to take it as a model, and I will show you how we can use this model for our mobility issue. So I go to one more point and then we will make a break. I will try to show you now how Vincent Kaufmann, French sociologist, has adapted this scheme of Bourdieu into the mobility, for mobility reasons. So he was focusing on the notion motility that is coming from biology and is named the potential for mobility. That means the motility describes the way, the means of mobility you are able to use. So the potential of mobility, it is not the mobility put into action, and it refers also both to the physical spatial notion, but also to social mobility. Kaufmann et al. Analyzed residential mobility, so people move from Berlin to Frankfurt because the career options are better, or have to move out from Berlin center because they can't afford the apartment anymore, and move out to the suburbs, something like that. So residential mobility, migratory movement, people moving from rural areas of Europe or from other parts of the world to Europe for some reasons, which are not of interest, but they move to stay permanently in a certain region. Then, of course, travel is something we had something that has increased a lot in the last 50, 60 years. The number of travels and the distances of travels. Like 50 years, having traveled to Eastern Asia, Thailand, whatever, was absolutely luxury. Something that nowadays it's hard to believe that, but it's something that has changed a lot. And of course, very important for us, everyday mobility in relation to work, leisure, and so on. So, Kaufman et al. Assess the individually varying access to, competence in, and appropriation of mobility and identify 6 different motility clusters. I don't go into detail, but it goes from very high motility to very restricted motility. And interestingly for them, as they researched, they did their empirical research, more than 5,000 probants in France, they said that language is super important for having a high motility. Why? They say they have analyzed many rural people in France who don't speak English until today. French people normally, well, at that time, normally only spoke French. And that did not permit them to move out of France, so they always stayed in the French-speaking community. And as we all know, if you want to travel abroad, you have to speak English. So language is quite important. And you also might know, if you travel outside Berlin, going to rural parts, or want to use public transport in Germany, it's better if you speak German, because you don't always find English apps or English schedules or whatever. So language is very important. This is one very surprising fact that they found out, but it shows that mobility is very strongly connected to communication and the means of communication. And what they found out that they said, okay, motility is a condition that forms capital. If you are able to move out, the Frankfurt example, if you're able to travel to Frankfurt each week and going back, then you can have bigger chances to form economic capital out of it. So it can be exchanged. Therefore, they speak of mobility capital. That is Kaufman et al. And if you put this scheme into this old Bourdieuian social sphere, we could say this is the entrepreneurs, let's just keep it in mind, and now we're having this. People with very high capital, be it economic or cultural, have a very distant mobility style. They are frequent flyers, they are probably luxury car drivers, they are in the middle range, they are frequent train riders, that frequent means every week to Frankfurt, forth and back. And on the other side, we have captive public transport users that have lower capital volume, and we could say on the very end are captive car drivers in the rural areas where they have no chance to use public transport because it's practically not existing or not working very fine. And yeah, this is also a model. We cannot, I would not say, yeah, it is like this way, but this is a way of adoption of the Kaufman approach towards motility into this Bourdieu's class model connected. Well, I would say so far, maybe if you have questions or critics.
Just to understand capital volume, what's capital volume compared to economic capital?
Yeah. So this is capital volume means general, all the symbolic capital. It means cultural, economic and social that is adopted. As you see here, what is missing in Bourdieu's, in the Bourdieu system, this is a Bourdieu system, is the social capital. But Bourdieu assumes everyone will create social capital. And it's not clear, of course, the industrialist will create